My family has a word for me. Artistic. It sounds like a compliment, doesn't it? But in the Croft family, it's a 4-syllable word for disappointment. It means dreamer, unrealistic, and most damningly unprofitable. My father, Richard, is a man who measures life in quarterly reports and return on investment. My mother, Catherine, measures it in social standing and the reflected glory of her children. And my sister, Brianna, the golden child, the real estate prodigy, she measures life in square footage and sharp-angled glass and steel monoliths that scrape the sky. I measure it in shades of cerulean blue, in the texture of old canvas, and the stories whispered by forgotten things. You can see the problem. For 30 years, I was the family's strange, little charity case. The one they had to pat on the head and indulge. The one they had to explain away at cocktail parties. Oh, Olivia, she's the artistic one. It was always said with a tight, apologetic smile, a verbal signal to the listener that I wasn't to be taken seriously.
Hi.
While Brianna was closing million-dollar deals and getting her Wharton MBA framed in gold, I was mixing paints in my tiny studio apartment, selling the occasional piece at a local art fair for just enough to cover my rent. I wasn't failing. Not really. I was living. But in my family's world, if it didn't come with a stock option, it didn't count. The only person who ever saw me, truly saw me, was my grandfather, Samuel. He was my father's father, but he was a different breed of man entirely. While his son was building a modern empire, Grandpa Samuel was obsessed with the past. He was a self-taught local historian, a man whose eyes would light up when talking about colonial shipping routes or the lives of the families who first settled our coastal New England town. He saw the world not as a balance sheet, but as a tapestry of stories. He'd take me on long walks, not through the polished city center, but along the crumbling seawalls and forgotten paths. He'd point to a field and tell me about the battle that was fought there, or to an old gnarled oak and tell me it was a marker on a pre-revolutionary map. He loved my art. He'd come to my tiny apartment, squint at a new painting, and say things like, "You've captured the melancholy of the November light, Livy. It's perfect." He was the only one who didn't use the word artistic like an epitaph for my potential. When he died at 92, it felt like the last light in my world had been extinguished. The funeral was a testament to my family's values. It was less a mourning and more a networking event. My father gave a eulogy that sounded like he was reading the highlights from Grandpa's portfolio. Brianna stood beside him, looking statuesque and bereaved in a designer black dress, accepting condolences from business associates who were already calculating how this would affect the market. I stood in the back, invisible, clutching a small, smooth stone Grandpa had given me from the beach by his favorite lighthouse. The reading of the will a week later was the final, formal coronation of Brianna and the official declaration of my irrelevance. We sat in the mahogany-paneled office of Mr. Finch, the family lawyer, a man whose face seemed permanently fixed in an expression of mild disapproval. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and entitlement. My father sat back, looking proud. My mother was already planning how to announce Brianna's inheritance in the society pages. Brianna herself had an air of bored inevitability, like a queen waiting for a crown she'd been promised at birth. Mr. Finch cleared his throat and began. To my beloved granddaughter, Brianna Croft, in recognition of her sharp mind and business acumen, which so reminds me of my late wife, I leave the entirety of my stock portfolio, my property holdings in the city, and the contents of my savings and investment accounts. He paused to let the weight of the words settle. It was a fortune. Millions. Brianna gave a small, dignified nod, as if she'd just been told her car was ready. My mother reached over and squeezed her hand, tears of pride in her eyes. My father's chest puffed out. Mr. Finch adjusted his glasses and continued, a slight, almost imperceptible shift in his tone. And to my other beloved granddaughter, Olivia Croft, my heart gave a pathetic little flutter. Maybe he'd left me his books, or his collection of old maps, something that mattered to us. In recognition of her unique way of seeing the world and her appreciation for things others overlook, I leave the old Port Blossom Lighthouse, known as the Beacon, and its adjoining cliff face property in its current as-is condition. Silence. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Then a snort. It came from my father. He tried to disguise it as a cough, but it was too late. Brianna's lips twitched into a smirk. A cruel, sharp little thing. My mother looked at me with an expression of such profound pity. It was worse than any insult. The old lighthouse, Brianna finally said, her voice dripping with condescension. The one that's been abandoned for 50 years. The one that's literally falling into the sea. It's a project, my father said, clapping his hands together with false heartiness. Your grandfather always loved his little jokes. A final joke on the dreamer. They all laughed then. Not a mean laugh, not at first. It was a laugh of relief. The sound of a settled hierarchy being confirmed. The serious person got the serious inheritance. The artistic one got the crumbling, romantic ruin. It was fitting. It was perfect. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a burning tide of humiliation. I just stared at the polished surface of the table, watching their distorted, laughing faces in the reflection. Mr. Finch slid a large, rusty iron key and a thick, leather-bound book across the table toward me. The key to the lighthouse, Miss Croft, and the keeper's logbook. Your grandfather specified you were to have it. I took them. The key was cold and heavy in my hand. A solid piece of failure. The logbook smelled of salt and dust. I didn't say a word. I just stood up, turned, and walked out of the office. Their laughter, following me down the hall, like a pack of dogs. That was the moment it all began. The moment I was officially cast out, given a pile of rocks as my portion of the family legacy. They thought it was a joke, but they had forgotten one thing about my grandfather. He never did anything without a reason, and we shared a love for history, where the real stories are always buried, just beneath the surface. I didn't go home. I couldn't face my small apartment, a space that suddenly felt like another cage. Another testament to my small life. Instead, I just drove. The city gave way to suburbs. The suburbs to winding country roads, until the air began to taste of salt, and the sky opened up. I drove toward the coast, toward Port Blossom, the town my family had left behind, for bigger, shinier places. I drove until the road ended at a rickety wooden fence, with a faded "No trespassing" sign. Beyond it, a dirt track led up a windswept hill, and there it was. The Port Blossom Beacon. It wasn't just crumbling, it was a skeleton. The white paint had mostly peeled away, revealing the weathered gray stone beneath. Half the glass in the lantern room was shattered, leaving jagged teeth pointing at the sky. A flock of gulls had taken up residence on the wraparound gallery, their white droppings streaking the stone like tears. It stood on a jagged cliff of dark granite, a lonely sentinel overlooking a churning, gray-green bay. It was magnificent, and utterly, heartbreakingly broken. My inheritance, my joke. I parked the car and walked up the path, the rusty key clutched in my fist. The salt spray was a mist on my face, and the wind whipped my hair, a wild, lonely sound. The main door was thick oak, swollen with a century of damp. The key grated in the massive iron lock, a sound of protest and surrender. With a heave of my shoulder, the door groaned open, releasing a breath of air that was cold and heavy, with the smell of decay, dust, and something else, the faint, lingering scent of whale oil and old tobacco. The inside was worse than I could have imagined. Dust lay in thick, furry blankets over everything. Cobwebs hung like macabre chandeliers from the winding iron staircase. A few pieces of rotted furniture lay on their sides, spilling their stuffing like entrails. The air was so still and dead, it felt like I had stepped into a tomb. And in that moment, The dam of composure I had so carefully constructed in the lawyer's office finally broke. A sob tore from my throat, raw and ugly. I sank down onto the dusty floor, heedless of the filth, and I cried. I cried for my grandfather, for the loss of the one person who understood me. I cried for myself, for the stinging public humiliation. I cried for the 30 years I had spent trying to earn a crumb of the approval that was served to Brianna on a silver platter every single day. It wasn't about the money. I had never expected the money. It was about the laughter, the casual, dismissive cruelty of it. The way they had looked at me, with that mixture of pity and contempt, as if I were a child who had brought a dandelion to a flower show. They saw this place, this magnificent, history-soaked ruin, as a punchline. And by extension, that's what I was. As I sat there, my tears leaving clean tracks in the dust on my cheeks, the years of small cuts and deep wounds began to replay in my mind. It was a highlight reel of my own inadequacy. I was 8 years old, standing in the living room. Our living room was a showcase, all cream carpets and minimalist furniture. I was so proud. I held up a canvas, my first real painting on a stretched canvas, a swirling, vibrant sunset over the ocean. I'd used every color in my paint box. "Look, Mom, look what I made." My mother, Catherine, glanced over from the phone, her brow furrowed. "Oh, that's colorful, Olivia. Just be careful you don't get any of that on the sofa. Your father's clients are coming over tonight." She turned back to her call, dismissing me. A few hours later, Brianna, who was 10, came home waving a piece of paper, a certificate for first place in the district mathletics competition. The phone calls stopped. My father, Richard, who had barely grunted at my painting, scooped her up in a bear hug. "That's my girl. That's my little genius." That night, they ordered a special cake. My painting was quietly moved to the garage, where it eventually got ruined by a leaky pipe. Brianna's certificate was framed and hung in my father's home office, right next to his own degrees. I was 17, sitting at the polished to a mirror-sheen dining room table for a family discussion about my future. This was code for my father, telling me what my future would be. I had my portfolio spread out, filled with sketches, charcoals, and small paintings. My application to the Rhode Island School of Design was filled out, waiting for a signature on the financial aid forms. Art school? My father said the words like he was handling something distasteful. "Olivia, be realistic. What is the career path? Teaching high school art for $40,000 a year? We are not paying $100,000 for you to learn a hobby." It didn't matter that I had a scholarship offer. It wasn't a full ride. It required a contribution. "It's not a hobby, Dad. It's what I'm good at. It's what I love." He just shook his head. "Love doesn't pay the mortgage. It's a waste of time and a waste of money." The conversation was over. 2 years later, when Brianna announced she wanted to get her MBA at Wharton, a program with a price tag that could have funded a small art colony for a decade, my father didn't blink. He called it the best investment we'll ever make. He co-signed the loans, paid her rent on a luxury apartment in Philadelphia, and talked about our daughter at Wharton to anyone who would listen. I went to a state college, studied graphic design, because it was deemed a practical art, and paid for it myself with part-time jobs and student loans that I was still paying off. The pain of these memories was sharp, but it was the memory of Grandpa Samuel that hurt the most, because it was laced with so much love. I remembered being about 12, and he'd brought me here, to this very lighthouse. We had to get the key from the Town Historical Society back then. He'd swung this same heavy door open, and to my 12-year-old eyes, it was a magical castle. He'd led me up the winding staircase, his hand on my back. He'd pointed out the keeper's quarters, the little details I would have missed, the worn groove in the floor where the keeper paced on stormy nights, the faint pencil marks on the wall tracking a child's height. We'd stood in the lantern room, surrounded by the great, dark lens, looking out at the bay. He didn't see a ruin. He saw its life. "This light saved hundreds of ships, Livy," he'd said, his voice full of reverence. "It was built by hand, stone by stone. A family lived here, raised their children here. They kept the light burning through hurricanes and blizzards. It's not just a building, it's a promise. He'd looked at a sketch I'd done of an old fishing boat. You see this, don't you? You see the story in things. Your sister, your father, they see things for what they can become. A plot of land is a future skyscraper. You see things for what they are, and what they were. History and art, Livy, they're the same thing. They're about seeing the value in things others discard. Never let anyone tell you that's not a gift. His words echoed in the dusty silence of the lighthouse, a ghostly comfort. He hadn't seen me as a disappointment. He had seen me as a kindred spirit, and he had left me this place, this crumbling, worthless, magnificent place. It wasn't a joke. It couldn't have been. It had to be a message. A strange sense of calm began to settle over me, pushing back the grief. It was a feeling of duty. I couldn't just leave this place to rot. It was the last piece of him I had left. I got to my feet, my joints protesting. I would clean. I would do something. I found a splintered crate, and upending it, used it as a makeshift table for the heavy logbook Mr. Finch had given me. The leather was cracked, but the binding was still strong. I opened it carefully. The first page was dated 1885. The handwriting was an elegant, looping script, recording wind speeds and weather patterns. SS Perry Marquette sighted, 3 leagues east, making good time for Boston. I lost myself, for what must have been an hour, flipping through the pages, a chronicler of a lost world. I read about storms, about births, about the loneliness of the job. I read about the switch from whale oil to kerosene. I saw the handwriting change as a new keeper took over. It was a direct link to the history my grandfather had so adored. I was near the end of the book, in a section of blank pages, when my fingers brushed against something thick and stiff, tucked into a sleeve, sewn into the back cover. It was an oilskin pouch, the kind sailors used to keep their tobacco dry. It was surprisingly heavy. With trembling fingers, I worked open the stiff flap. Inside, folded into a neat, tight square, was a document. It was not paper, it was vellum, yellowed with age, but incredibly well preserved. The ink was faded brown, the handwriting an almost illegible, spidery script, with elaborate, flourished capitals. At the top, a crest was embossed, bearing the seal of the British Crown. It was beautiful, an artifact, a piece of art in its own right. I unfolded it carefully, my heart pounding for a reason I didn't understand. It was a land grant. The date was 1754. It was a grant from King George II to a man named Josiah Croft, my ancestor, for his service in the French and Indian War. It described the land he was being given, that promontory of granite and earth, known to the locals as Port Blossom Point, upon which he shall have leave to erect a beacon for the safe passage of His Majesty's ships. I smiled. Grandpa had saved the original deed. A beautiful piece of family history. I was about to fold it back up, a treasure to be framed, when a particular line of archaic legal text snagged my attention. I had to squint to make it out. The old-fashions, looking like an "uff," and in perpetuity, to his heirs and assigns, we do grant exclusive title, not only to the aforementioned promontory, but to all mineral, riparian, and subterranean rights appertaining to the aforementioned cove and its contiguous seabed, from the high water mark to a distance of 1 nautical league. The words didn't fully connect. Mineral rights, riparian rights, it sounded impressive, but it was probably just meaningless, flowery language from 250 years ago. I put the document down, my mind already drifting. I should probably call my landlord, tell him I might be a day late with the rent this month. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. It was Brianna. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the ignore button. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Olivia, are you at that dump?" Her voice was crisp, impatient. "No, hello? No, are you okay?" "Hello to you too, Brianna." "Yes, I'm at the Lighthouse." "Good. Listen, I don't have much time. I'm just calling to give you a heads up. The final permits for the Ocean's Edge came through. We're breaking ground on Monday." Ocean's Edge, that was the name of her new luxury resort and spa. The crown jewel of her career, built on a huge tract of land that bordered the bay. The same bay I was currently looking at, through a shattered pane of glass. That's great for you, Brianna, I said, my voice flat. It is, she said, completely missing my tone. It's going to be spectacular. But listen, the reason I'm calling is the bay. Our environmental impact report says we'll need to do some minor dredging to deepen the channel for the yacht moorings. And there's going to be some managed runoff from the golf course. It's all approved, all above board, but it might get a little messy in the water for a few months. I just didn't want you to get all, artistic about it. If you saw some dirty water from your pile of rocks. Managed runoff, dredging. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head. He used to talk about this bay with a fierce protectiveness. He told me about the delicate oyster beds, the nesting grounds for piping plovers, the way the currents worked. He'd called it a perfectly balanced teacup. Brianna was talking about taking a sledgehammer to it. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was a flicker of my grandfather's own protective instinct. Brianna, are you sure that's a good idea? Grandpa always said this ecosystem was incredibly fragile. She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that scraped against my nerves. Oh, Olivia, leave the business to the business people. Grandpa was a sweet old man, but he was a sentimentalist. This is progress. It's what he would have wanted, really, turning dormant assets into profitable ones. Anyway, I have to run. The investors are flying in. Try not to fall through the floorboards. She hung up. I stood there in the echoing silence, her words ringing in my ears, turning dormant assets into profitable ones. My eyes fell back to the vellum document on the crate. All mineral, riparian, and subterranean rights appertaining to the aforementioned cove and its contiguous seabed. A thought, wild and improbable, began to form in my mind. A tiny spark in the darkness. What if it wasn't just flowery language? What if the dormant asset wasn't the crumbling lighthouse, but the bay itself? The very bay my sister was about to dredge and pollute. The bay her entire multi-million-dollar resort depended on for its views, its recreation, its entire reason for being. Suddenly, the cold air in the lighthouse didn't feel so cold. It felt electric. I picked up the land grant, my hands shaking slightly. My family had laughed. They'd called my inheritance a joke. But maybe, just maybe, my grandfather hadn't left me a punchline. Maybe he'd left me a loaded gun. The initial euphoria was quickly replaced by a wave of overwhelming doubt. I'm an artist. I mix colors and stretch canvases. I know the difference between burnt sienna and raw umber, not between riparian rights and a hole in the ground. I looked at the ancient document, its script like a foreign language, and felt a familiar sense of inadequacy creep back in. Who was I to think I could understand this, let alone wield it against someone like Brianna, with her army of sharp-suited lawyers? For 2 days, I lived in a state of suspended animation. I camped out in the lighthouse, sleeping in my car, and subsisting on protein bars and bottled water. I swept away the worst of the dust and debris, a mindless, physical task to keep my brain from spinning out of control. I spent hours staring at the vellum, reading that one critical sentence over and over again, as if repetition would somehow unlock its secrets. I went online, my phone's spotty service a constant frustration. I typed phrases from the grant into search engines. The results were a dizzying maze of legal jargon, historical precedents, and contradictory articles. Doctrine of pre-existing sovereignty, fee simple absolute, extinguishment by statute. It was hopeless. I was an art student who'd wandered into a particle physics lecture. Defeated, I almost gave up. I almost folded the document, put it back in its pouch, and resigned myself to a life of watching my sister's yachts cruise through a murky, polluted bay. It's what my family expected of me, after all. To be the quiet, noble loser. It was a role I knew how to play. But then I'd look at the lighthouse, standing so stubbornly against the wind, and I'd hear my grandfather's voice. See the value in things others discard. He wouldn't have wanted me to give up. I needed help. Not from my family, obviously. I needed an outsider. There was only one person I could trust. I pulled up the contact on my phone. Maya. Maya and I had been friends since college. She was everything I wasn't. Pragmatic, organized, and completely immune to nonsense. She'd gone to law school for 2 years before deciding she preferred the meticulous, behind-the-scenes work of being a paralegal. She had a mind like a steel trap and a deep, abiding hatred for my family's treatment of me. "You're where?" she asked, her voice crackling over the phone. "The Lighthouse Grandpa left me," I said. "In Port Blossom. The one your sister called a pile of rocks? Liv, what are you doing there? I thought you'd be, I don't know, throwing paint at a canvas in righteous anger." I took a deep breath. "I think Grandpa left me something else, something important, but I don't know what it is." I tried to explain the land grant, stumbling over the archaic words. Maya was silent for a long moment. "A colonial-era grant? Liv, are you sure? Most of those old claims were standardized or voided centuries ago when state and federal laws were codified. It's probably just a historical curiosity." "I know it sounds crazy," I said, my voice pleading, "but the wording, it's so specific, and Grandpa tucked it away so carefully. Can I send you a picture of it?" "Yeah, of course, send it over. But don't get your hopes up. The law is not a romantic novel. It's a series of brutal, boring updates." I took the clearest pictures I could, my hands shaking, and sent them to her. Then I waited. The minutes stretched into an hour. I paced the floor of the lantern room, watching the sun begin to dip toward the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and violet. It was a sunset my mother would have called gaudy. Finally, my phone rang. It was Maya. Her voice was completely different. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a low, humming excitement. "Olivia," she said, and her tone sent a shiver down my spine. "Where did you say you got this?" "It was in the back of the keeper's logbook, in an oilskin pouch." Okay. I've been looking at this and cross-referencing some databases we have at the firm. This is not standard boilerplate, not even for the 1750s. The language about mineral, riparian, and subterranean rights being granted in perpetuity is unusually explicit, and I ran a preliminary title search on the property. The lighthouse itself is on the county record, of course, but the bay, there's nothing. It's like a blank spot on the map, legally speaking. No record of those specific rights ever being transferred, sold, or seized by eminent domain. My heart started to pound, a heavy, hopeful drum against my ribs. "So what does that mean?" "It means," she said, drawing the word out, "that you need a real lawyer, not a real estate hack like your family uses, but a specialist, a dinosaur, someone who lives for this kind of dusty, impossible case. And I think I know a guy." The guy was a man named Marcus Garrison. Maya's description of him as a dinosaur was apartment. His office wasn't in a gleaming downtown tower. It was on the second floor of a rambling Victorian house, crammed with so many books and filing cabinets that it seemed the paper was the only thing holding the building up. He was in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair, eyes that twinkled behind thick glasses, and a tweed jacket that had probably been in style when the lighthouse was still operational. He didn't shake my hand. He reached for the vellum document, which I'd protected in a hard-shell art portfolio. He handled it with the reverence of a museum curator, laying it on his massive oak desk under a pool of light from a green-shaded lamp. For 20 minutes, he didn't speak. He just peered at it through a large magnifying glass, occasionally letting out a low "hum" or fascinating. "Josiah Croft," he said at last, looking up at me. "Quite a character. He was a second son, had no prospects back in England, made a name for himself as a scout. The crown was giving away land like party favors back then, trying to solidify its hold on the colonies. So it's real," I breathed. "But is it legal still?" Mr. Garrison leaned back in his creaking leather chair. "Miss Croft," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "that is the million-dollar question. Or in this case, perhaps the $100 million question." He explained that after the Revolution, most royal grants were either re-ratified by the new state governments or dissolved. But Port Blossom, being a tiny, unimportant backwater at the time, was often overlooked. If this grant had never been legally challenged or superseded, if Josiah Croft's descendants had maintained ownership of the core property, the lighthouse cliff, uninterrupted. Then there was a chance, a slim but tantalizing chance, that the grant was still in effect. It would be a spectacular legal battle, he mused, his eyes gleaming. A true David and Goliath case, the kind of thing that makes a sleepy old lawyer like me feel young again. Leave it with me. I need to dig. I need to go to the state archives. I need to cross-reference maritime law from the 18th century. This will take some time. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I stayed at the lighthouse, feeling like a character in a Gothic novel, waiting for a letter that would decide my fate. I found a strange peace in the solitude. I sketched the changing tides, the wheeling gulls, the way the light fell through the broken glass of the lantern room. For the first time in years, I was creating art just for myself, with no thought of what it was worth or who would buy it. I was just seeing and capturing. My family, meanwhile, had begun to notice my absence. My mother left a series of worried then annoyed voicemails. Olivia, darling, are you all right? It's just, we haven't heard from you. Olivia, this isn't funny anymore. Call me back. Your father is getting upset. My father didn't bother with worried. He left one message, his voice tight with irritation. Olivia, your mother is in a state. Whatever little artistic sulk you're having, it's time to end it. Call home. Then came the call from Brianna, a video call. She was on a construction site, the hard hat perched jauntily on her perfect hair. Behind her, a massive yellow excavator was clawing at the earth. Just wanted to show you the progress, she yelled over the noise. We're really moving. You should see the plans for the infinity pool overlooking the bay. It's going to be iconic. I just stared at the screen, at the scarred earth behind her, and felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It wasn't about revenge, it was about protection. The call from Mr. Garrison came the next day. I answered on the first ring. Miss Croft, he said, and his voice was completely devoid of its previous academic curiosity. It was firm, solid, like the granite cliff the lighthouse was built on. I've spent the last 6 days in the dustiest corners of the state archive. I've traced the title of Port Blossom Point from Josiah Croft in 1754 all the way down to Samuel Croft, your grandfather. It's an unbroken chain. The property has never been sold outside the family. And I found what I was looking for. Or rather, what I didn't find. What didn't you find? I whispered. Any record of extinguishment, any subsequent deed or statute that specifically nullifies the ancillary rights detailed in the original grant. The state charter for Port Blossom in 1788 is a generic document. The federal maritime acts of the 19th century deal with navigation, not ownership of the seabed in small coves. It's a ghost, a legal ghost, that has haunted that deed for 250 years, and no one ever noticed. He took a deep breath. I could hear the rustle of papers. Olivia, he said, and the use of my first name was momentous. As far as I can determine, based on every piece of evidence available, this document is an ironclad, pre-federal conveyance of title. It holds, your grandfather didn't just leave you a crumbling lighthouse. He left you the entire bay. I sank down onto the cold stone floor, the phone pressed to my ear. I could hear the excavator from my sister's site, a faint rumbling carried on the wind. She was digging into the edge of my property, my bay. What do we do? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. A new, dangerous excitement crept into Mr. Garrison's voice. Your sister sees this land as a commodity. Your grandfather, I suspect, saw it as a legacy. He gave you the means to protect it. He gave you the ultimate hidden leverage. So what do? We stop playing defense. We don't ask for their consideration. We inform them of the facts, and we do it quietly, professionally, and with the full force of the law. It's time to make our first move. The plan Mr. Garrison laid out was a masterclass in strategic patience. My first instinct was to call Brianna, to scream at her, to wave the land grant in her face. He strongly advised against it. Emotion is their territory, Olivia. They thrive on it. They manipulate it. Our territory is the law. It is cold, it is factual, and it is unassailable. We will not engage with them directly. We will engage with their corporation. He spent 2 days drafting the documents. They weren't angry letters. They were scalpels. The primary weapon was a notice of claim and cease and desist. It wasn't addressed to Brianna Croft. It was addressed to the board of directors, Croft Luxury Properties LLC, with copies sent to their primary construction contractor, the County Planning Commission, and the bank that held the financing for the resort. The language was dense, dry, and utterly terrifying. It cited the 1754 land grant by its archival number. It detailed my claim to the mineral, riparian, and subterranean rights of the entire bay. It stated that the ongoing construction, specifically the dredging and planned runoff systems, constituted an illegal trespass and an imminent threat of irreparable damage to my property. It demanded an immediate and complete halt to all work within 500 yards of the high water mark. To add teeth, Mr. Garrison attached a motion for a temporary restraining order, which he had already filed with the county court, set for an emergency hearing in 3 days. "We're not just telling them to stop," he explained to me over the phone. "We're getting a judge to tell them they must stop, or be in contempt of court. It takes the power out of their hands entirely." The documents were sent out by certified mail and by courier. And then we waited. For 24 hours, there was nothing but the sound of the wind and the gulls. I sat in the lantern room, watching the excavators on the far side of the bay continue their work, and I felt a tremor of doubt. What if they just ignored it? What if they laughed at this too? The first sign that the bomb had landed came not from my family, but from a confused-sounding man with a thick local accent who called my cell phone. Yeah, is this an Olivia Croft? My name is Frank. I'm the site foreman for the Ocean's Edge project. We just had a county sheriff serve us with some papers. Something about a restraining order? My boss is going ballistic, says it's a mistake, but the sheriff says if we move another shovel of dirt, he's impounding all our equipment. Can you tell me what the hell is going on? I took a shaky breath, Mr. Garrison's instructions echoing in my ears. Stay calm. Be a broken record. I can't discuss the details, Frank. Your company's lawyers will need to speak with my lawyer, Mr. Garrison. His contact information is on the documents. I hung up before he could respond. 10 minutes later, my phone screamed. It was Brianna. I let it ring 4 times, a small, petty act of control, before answering. "Olivia, what have you done?" Her voice was a shriek of pure distilled rage. I could hear phones ringing and people talking in the background. She was in her office, in full panic mode. "Hello, Brianna," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Don't you hello Brianna me. I have a sheriff shutting down my site. My investors are calling. What is this garbage about you owning the bay? Is this some kind of sick joke? Are you trying to blackmail me?" I held the phone away from my ear, letting her tirade wash over me. It was all the things I expected. Accusations, insults, threats. She called me pathetic, jealous, a failure who was trying to ruin the one successful person in the family. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke, using the exact words Mr. Garrison and I had rehearsed. "It's not a joke, Brianna. It's a legal notice of a pre-existing property claim. It's all very straightforward." "Straightforward? You're insane. You're waving around some dusty, 200-year-old piece of paper. My lawyers will tear this apart in 5 minutes. Then I suggest you have them do that," I said calmly. "They can contact my lawyer. His name is Marcus Garrison. I'm sure you'll find his number on the letterhead." And then I did something I had never done in my entire life. I hung up on her. I pressed the red button, cutting off her sputtering rage, and the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The silent takeover was in motion. The next wave of the assault came from my father. He tried a different tactic. He didn't yell. His voice was heavy with a deep, theatrical disappointment, a tone he'd perfected over years of making me feel small. "Olivia, I just got off the phone with your sister. I have to say, I am shocked. Absolutely shocked. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about what Grandpa left me, Dad. He left you a ruin as a sentimental gesture, a tax write-off. He didn't leave it to you so you could sabotage your own sister's life work. Brianna has millions of dollars on the line. She has investors. She has a reputation. You are going to destroy her. Her project is threatening to destroy the Bay, I countered, my voice stronger now. Oh, for God's sake, spare me the bleeding heart environmentalism. He snapped, his composure cracking. You've spent your whole life with your head in the clouds, but I never took you for a vandal. You're tearing this family apart, Olivia. Over what? A pile of rocks and some misplaced sense of righteousness. What would your grandfather think of this mess? The question was meant to be a killing blow, a final appeal to my love for Grandpa Samuel, but it had the opposite effect. It solidified my resolve. I think Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound certainty. He saw this coming. He knew Brianna, and he knew you. He knew you'd try to monetize every last inch of this coast. He didn't leave me a joke, Dad. He left me a shield, and I'm finally learning how to use it. I didn't hang up on him. I let him absorb the silence, the sheer, unbelievable defiance in my tone. He was the one who ended the call, sputtering something about me being ungrateful before the line went dead. The final, predictable salvo came from my mother. Her weapon of choice was, as always, emotional blackmail. She was crying when I answered the phone. They were real tears, I think, but they weren't for me. They were for the disruption, the inconvenience, the social embarrassment of it all. Olivia, how could you? She sobbed. Family is supposed to support each other. Brianna is your sister. She has worked so hard for this, and you're just trying to tear it all down out of jealousy. After all we've done for you, after all the support we've given your artistic pursuits. The hypocrisy was so vast, so breathtaking, it was almost funny. The support, the lectures about getting a real job, the dismissive comments about my hobby, the laughter in the lawyer's office. What support, Mom? I asked, and my voice was cold. Was it support when you told me my painting would get the sofa dirty? Was it support when Dad called art school a waste of money? Was it support when you all sat there and laughed at my inheritance? She was silent, the sobs catching in her throat. She had no answer. She had never been confronted with the simple, unvarnished truth before. This isn't about jealousy, I said, looking out at the beautiful wild bay. This is about legacy. You should all try looking it up sometime. I ended the call. The family had deployed their entire arsenal: rage, disappointment, and guilt. And for the first time in my life, none of it had worked. I was no longer a target they could manipulate. I was a fortress, and I was standing on my own ground. The power shift was not a sudden, dramatic event. It was a slow, grinding process, like the tide wearing away at a stone. My family's initial strategy was to treat my claim as a frivolous, annoying lawsuit brought by a delusional amateur. Brianna's high-priced lawyers, from a firm with a name like a string of expensive cars, filed a motion to have my temporary restraining order immediately dismissed. They argued the land grant was an irrelevant historical artifact, voided by centuries of common use and state law. They painted me as a greedy, estranged family member, attempting a shakedown. This was the moment of truth. It all came down to the emergency hearing in the Port Blossom County Courthouse, a modest brick building that smelled of floor polish and old paper. I sat next to Mr. Garrison, my hands clammy, my heart hammering against my ribs. Across the aisle sat Brianna, flanked by two lawyers who looked like they were carved from granite and arrogance. My father and mother were in the row behind her, a united front of parental disapproval. They wouldn't even look at me. Brianna's lead lawyer, a man with a booming voice and a smug smile, went first. He was condescending, dismissive, and eloquent. He called the 1754 grant a charming piece of folklore, and my claim a legal fantasy. He argued that for over 2 centuries, the bay had been used by the public for fishing and recreation, establishing a clear precedent of public domain. He made it sound like I was trying to claim ownership of the moon. Then it was Mr. Garrison's turn. He didn't use a booming voice. He was quiet, methodical, and devastating. He walked the judge, a woman in her 60s, with a reputation for being a stickler for historical detail, through his research. He presented the certified, unbroken chain of title. He showed her the statutes of the 18th and 19th centuries, highlighting not what they said, but what they didn't say. Your Honor, he concluded, his voice resonating in the quiet courtroom. The opposition argues that centuries of public use have nullified this grant. But public use for passage and recreation is not the same as industrial use for dredging and development. No one has ever before attempted to fundamentally alter the seabed of this cove. There is no precedent for it, and until such a time, the original, unextinguished rights of the property owner must be presumed to hold. My client is not claiming ownership of the water itself, but of the land beneath it, and the opposition has begun digging into her land without her permission. It's a simple case of trespass. The judge listened intently. Her fingers steepled. She looked from Mr. Garrison's carefully organized evidence to the slick but empty rhetoric of Brianna's lawyer. She took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. The motion to dismiss the temporary restraining order is denied, she said flatly. The order will remain in effect pending a full hearing on the merits of the claim. I suggest you all find a way to talk to each other. This seems to be a family matter that has unfortunately found its way into my court. A gasp went through the room. Brianna's face went pale. Her lawyer's smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. My father stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, as if seeing me for the first time. I felt a surge of triumph, so powerful, it almost made me dizzy. We had won. The first battle was ours. The fallout was immediate. The construction site remained silent, the machinery sitting idle like giant, sleeping beasts. Every day of delay was costing Brianna's company a fortune in penalties and interest. Her investors, who had been assured this was a minor nuisance, were now demanding answers. The bank was making nervous inquiries about the security of their loan, which was predicated on the resort having exclusive access to a pristine bay. The family's tactics shifted from aggression to desperate manipulation. My parents orchestrated a family summit at their house. The invitation was a command. I knew it was a trap, but Mr. Garrison agreed I should go. Let them talk, he said. Don't agree to anything. Just listen. Their desperation will reveal their weakness. I brought Maya with me for moral support. Walking into my parents' home felt like entering enemy territory. The air was thick with tension. Brianna, my father, and my mother were arranged in the living room like a tribunal. Olivia, my father began, trying to sound reasonable. We need to end this. This has gone on long enough. Okay, I said. My simple agreement seemed to throw him off. Good, he said. Now Brianna is prepared to be very generous. She will compensate you for your inconvenience. Brianna, looking like she just swallowed poison, spoke through clenched teeth. We will buy the lighthouse from you. $50,000. That's more than it's worth. You can take the money and go back to your art. I just looked at her. I didn't say a word. Maya, sitting beside me, gave my hand a tiny, encouraging squeeze. Okay, fine, my father snapped, his patience already wearing thin. 75,000. And you can keep the stupid logbook. Silence. 100,000. Brianna burst out, her voice rising. $100,000 for a pile of rocks you were laughing about 2 weeks ago. What more do you want? I let the question hang in the air, savoring the panic that was beginning to bloom in their eyes. They still didn't get it. They thought this was a negotiation, a matter of finding my price. They operated in a world where everything and everyone had a price tag. I finally leaned forward. It's not for sale, I said, my voice quiet but firm. The lighthouse is not for sale. The cliff is not for sale. And the bay is not for sale. Brianna stared at me, her face a mask of fury and confusion. Then what do you want? She screamed. What do you want, Olivia? I want you to stop, I said. That's all. Just stop. The power had shifted completely. I was no longer the one begging for scraps of attention. I was the one with the non-negotiable asset. They were the ones who were desperate. They had built a glass and steel empire on a foundation of sand, and I owned the beach. They had finally run out of ways to bully, guilt, or buy me. All they had left was to plead. Brianna came to the lighthouse alone. It was late afternoon, and the tide was low, exposing the slick, dark rocks of the seabed. She didn't drive up to the door. She parked at the bottom of the path and walked, a pilgrimage of defeat. She wasn't wearing a power suit or a hard hat. She was in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back, her face stripped of its usual defiant makeup. She looked smaller, diminished. I was sitting on the gallery, the narrow walkway that encircled the lantern room, sketching the intricate patterns of the tide pools. I heard her footsteps on the iron staircase long before she emerged. She stood there for a moment, catching her breath, looking out at the vast expanse of the bay. My bay. The investors are threatening to sue, she said, her voice flat, devoid of its usual sharp edges. The bank is calling in the loan. The contractors have pulled their equipment. It's over. You've won. I didn't feel the rush of victory I expected. I just felt a deep, weary sadness. This was never a game, Brianna, wasn't it? She shot back, a flicker of her old fire returning. It felt like a game, a very cruel one. You could have told me from the beginning. You could have warned me. I finally turned to look at her. Warned you? Like you warned me you were about to pollute this entire ecosystem. Like you warned me before you all laughed in my face at the will reading. When have you, or Mom, or Dad, ever warned me about anything? You don't warn people you don't respect, Brianna. You just talk at them, or about them. Tears welled in her eyes. Tears of frustration and self-pity. So what now? Are you just going to let it all fall apart? My entire life's work? Are you going to destroy me just to make a point? Your life's work? I stood up, the words I had held back for a lifetime, finally bubbling to the surface. You were handed your life's work. You were handed an MBA. You were handed Dad's connections. You were handed the family fortune. You were the golden child, destined for success. I was the artistic one, the dreamer, the joke. You laughed when Grandpa gave me this. You all stood there, and you laughed. You called it his final joke on me. I walked over to her, my voice dropping, but gaining intensity. But you were wrong. It wasn't a joke, it was a test. He knew what you were. He knew you saw the world as something to be conquered and monetized. And he knew me. He knew I saw the story, the history, the value in things you saw as worthless. He didn't give me a ruin, Brianna. He gave me a responsibility. He gave me the one thing your money could never buy, the truth of this place. She was openly crying now, her shoulders shaking. Please, Olivia, she whispered. Don't do this. Tell me what you want. I'll give you anything. And in that moment of her complete surrender, I knew exactly what I wanted. It wasn't money. It wasn't even revenge. Not really. It was justice. It was balance. It was the remaking of a world that had always been tilted in her favor. Okay, I said. Here are my terms. They are not negotiable. I laid it all out. The plan that Mr. Garrison and I had carefully constructed. It was my masterpiece. First, I said, the resort will be built, but not your version. The footprint will be reduced by 40%. The golf course is gone. It will be replaced with a protected nature preserve, managed by the town. Your dredging plans are canceled. Your runoff will be diverted to a state-of-the-art, closed-loop filtration system. The goal is zero environmental impact. You will sell a resort that coexists with the bay, not one that consumes it. She stared at me, dumbfounded. Second, I continued. A portion of the bay will have permanent protected public access, including a boat launch for local fishermen. Your resort will not be a private fortress. The investors will never agree, she started. They will. I cut her off, because the alternative is a total loss. Third, and this is the important part, you will establish the Samuel Croft Historical Trust in honor of the man you so gravely underestimated. 10% of the resort's net profits, in perpetuity, will be paid into this trust. I will be the sole administrator. Its first project will be the complete restoration of this lighthouse to full working order, to be maintained as a museum and historical landmark. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "Fourth," I said, delivering the final blow, "the trust will need seed money. You are going to buy the mineral and riparian rights from me. Not for me, personally, but for the trust. And the price is $5 million. It was a painful, symbolic number, a fraction of what they were worth, but a devastating sum for her to find in her current predicament. It wasn't for my pocket, it was the price of her education. And finally, you will issue a public statement, not just to the investors, but to the press. You will apologize for the initial design's environmental risks. You will praise the new, cooperative, eco-friendly plan, and you will announce the formation of the Historical Trust as a tribute to our family's deep roots in this community." She looked utterly broken. It was a complete and total dismantling of her vision, her ego, her victory. She would still have her resort, but it would be on my terms. It would be forever tied to the legacy of the grandfather she'd dismissed and the sister she had ridiculed. "You've thought of everything," she whispered. "I'm the artistic one," I said, a small, bitter smile on my lips. "I'm good at seeing the whole picture." She had no choice. She accepted. The charade was over. The power in the Croft family had not just shifted, it had been fundamentally, permanently, and irrevocably rewritten. It's been a year now. I'm telling you this story from the lantern room of the Port Blossom Beacon. But it's not a ruin anymore. The stone has been repointed. The gallery is solid iron, and the great lens above me is polished and whole. A few months ago, for the first time in over half a century, we lit the light. It was just for a night, a ceremonial gesture. But to see that beam cutting through the darkness, to know that I had brought it back to life, it was a feeling I don't have the words to paint. The Samuel Croft Historical Trust is thriving. We've already started a project to restore the Old Town Boatworks. Down below, nestled discreetly amongst the trees, is the Ocean's Edge Resort. It's smaller, quieter, and more beautiful than Brianna's monstrous vision ever could have been. People come for the pristine bay, for the nature trails, for the quiet. It's a success, but it's a different kind of success. It's built on respect, not conquest. My relationship with my family is quiet. It's a blank space. After Brianna signed the agreements, my parents tried to bridge the gap, to pretend we could all go back to family dinners and holiday gatherings. But you can't unbreak something that was shattered. You can't unsee the truth of people. We are civil, but we are separate. Their power over me is gone, and without it, we don't have much to talk about. I found I didn't miss the noise. My new family is here. It's Maya, who sits on the board of the trust with me. It's Mr. Garrison, who comes by for tea and tells me stories about obscure legal precedents. It's the local craftsmen who restored this lighthouse with such love and care. They are my people. My family thought my inheritance was a punchline. They measured worth in profit margins and stock prices. They never understood that the most valuable things are the ones that can't be sold. They're found in history, in stories, in a grandfather's faith, and in the duty to protect something beautiful from being erased by greed. They looked at a worthless cliff and a pile of rocks. But my grandfather and I, we saw a foundation. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. But in the end, it was about something more. It was about respect. Respect for my grandfather, for this beautiful place, and finally, after all these years, respect for myself. They had their world of glass and steel, and I had my lighthouse. And from up here, I can finally see everything clearly. So what would you have done? Would you have just taken the buyout money and walked away? Or would you have fought for the principle of the thing? I'm genuinely curious what you think, so let me know in the comments below. For anyone out there who has ever felt like the dreamer, the disappointment, or the underdog in your own story, I hope this reminds you that your strength might be hiding in the very thing others have dismissed. Your own lighthouse might be out there, waiting for you to find the key. Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories.